Eighth graders, good day. My name is Dwayne Benton. I'm a judge, a federal judge, and your teachers prepared me some questions here, and I'll stay with them. But I do want to welcome you to a federal courthouse and tell you that maybe one day you'll be on a jury over here in a federal courthouse. But today I want to talk about a few basics with you. Let's start out. Your teacher asked me, I don't mean to start this way, but he wants me to talk about judges to start with. And of course, you've learned by now that there are two levels of government, federal and state. And there are federal judges and state judges. You've learned about separation of powers, executive, legislative, judicial. I always remember that by LEG, L-E-G. Ha, ha, ha. It's L-E-J, but that's a good way to remember it if you get that on the test. And so let me start. How do you get to be a judge? Well, in federal courts, you're nominated by the president and then confirmed by the United States Senate. That's 50 of the 100 senators or more vote for you, but nominated by the president. States have different versions of screening, sending, but usually the governor ends up appointing. So that's how you get to be a judge. Of course, I forgot about the going to college for 4 years, law school after that for 3 years, and then passing this quiz called the bar exam. The quiz I'm making fun of at eighth graders. It's much more than a quiz. It's 2 days of sitting there and answering questions. That is the education, and then usually experience as a lawyer is required. And many judges have been judges on another court. I was a state court judge for 13 years before being a federal court judge the last 15 years. So that is how you get to do that. We hear cases. Now we're going to break into judges. There are basically two kinds of judges: appeals court judges and trial judges. And by that I mean this: trial judges are where there are witnesses and there is a jury. If any of you watch Law and Order, the latest version is SVU. It's been around forever. But you see trials there where there's the judge and the witnesses and the jury, and they decide the case. But there's usually just one judge there. Every place in America, there's one judge at trial. And so, because in America we fear a concentration of power in a person, there is the right to appeal to a higher court. I bet you've heard about that. And I'd be neglectful if I didn't tell you that above all courts by the United States Constitution, Article 3 and Article 6. Article 3 sets up the Supreme Court, and Article 6 says that federal law is the supreme law of the country, so-called supremacy clause. The Supreme Court is supreme of all courts, state and federal. So that is what courts do. 1 week a month, right in this courtroom. Before coronavirus, the lawyers would come in, one side would sit there, one side would sit there. We would listen to their cases and then rule on their cases. We issue written opinions. Writing and reading is very important to being a judge. If any of you think about being lawyers or judges, that's very important. So the rest of the time you may say, pretty nice job, only 1 week a month, your cases. The other 3 weeks of the month, we write opinions, like a term paper. We write like a term paper or research paper on the cases that we heard last month, and then I spend time with the clerks preparing for next month. So that is what we do on a regular basis. How do we make decisions? Well, there's a hierarchy of law in the United States of America. If the U.S. Congress has passed a law, and this is true on most things, there are exceptions, but on most things, if the United States Congress has passed a law, that law is supreme. That is, it controls and preempts and trumps the lower states' laws and court rulings. But if Congress hasn't spoken, then the state legislature passes the laws that controls the citizens of the states. And state governments have a lot of power, as you may know from the recent pandemic by whether the state legislatures and the state governors say you're supposed to have a mask on, you aren't supposed to, the bars can be open this late, the restaurants can be open this late. I think you get my point on that. So we make decisions based on that hierarchy. Basically, we interpret the laws. Basically, they bring to us a law, and one person says it means one thing, one person says it means another. In addition, we get private disputes among citizens. Okay, this can be between two corporations. They did a deal, and one side says, you did wrong, the other side says, you did wrong. It can be between consumers. Consumers can say that corporation lied to me and ripped me off. The bank ripped me off. Somebody ripped me off. I also should take a moment to tell you about small claims courts. Missouri has small claims courts. Most states have some sort of small claims court. And up to a certain amount of money at issue, like $5,000, it's usually pretty high, you can go there and appear by yourself. You don't even need a lawyer. Appear by yourself. The other side appears. If any of you have ever watched Judge Judy or heard of Judge Judy on TV, and there are 2 or 3 others on TV, you see what a small claims court looks like, where one side gives their view, the other side gives their view, and the judge makes a decision. So that is essentially how we make decisions. Your teacher and I talked, and I should talk to you about driving. You're close to the age of driving. Driver's licenses and the driver's license exams are state functions. They're set basically by state law. Some states allow a little younger age to begin driving. Yes, they do, on a learner's permit or something, or a restricted driver's license of some kinds. Other states don't. That's up to the states how they structure it. So state driver's licenses are laws passed by the state legislature. The license is very important. The little driver's license, the one in my pocket, is very important. You safeguard the license by not getting speeding tickets. If you get a certain number of speeding tickets, 4-ish in that range, you can lose your license. Yes, you can. Of course, drunken driving. If you drive while you're drunk. And drunk doesn't mean, and I'm sorry, students, I'm talking old people's talk, but I'll talk to you. Doesn't mean just wildly drunk. There is a lower level of alcohol, a relatively low level for teenagers, and that is that you're driving while intoxicated, even though you may think later in life that you didn't have a lot to drink. You're driving a car means you have consented to having your, I'm blowing like you do in the test, to having your very alcohol level tested by blowing into a simple little tube-like machine. Yes, yes. I know the officer talked to you about your constitutional rights, and you do have a lot of constitutional rights. For example, all you have to tell an officer is your name and give your identification. You do have to do that. I know some people say, well, I know my rights. I'm not going to tell my name or show my identification. That's not true. You have to show your name and identification. I bet the officer told you that. But the reason I'm stressing that is because after that you can say, well, I'm not going to take the test. Well, if you do, you lose your license for a year. In Missouri, I'm giving you Missouri law if in doubt. Now, of course, like so many things, you have the right to appeal to a judge. This is another place a judge comes in, a state court judge typically. And you appeal to the judge and say, I wasn't really intoxicated. There wasn't really cause for that. But generally, it's called implied consent. Generally, your driving the car is consent by state law to having to take the test or lose your license for a year. That I would stress to you. That is a question that your teacher got close to. Always remember not to panic. I mean that sincerely. If you're dealing with a police officer or in a court setting, I know it's easy to panic, but never panic. Always keep your hands visible, be respectful to the officer, and remember that even if something's being done wrong, it can be looked at by a court. And as the officer told you, you have the right to invoke your right to silence. Remember, it doesn't include your name or identification or basic little questions. The Supreme Court has said that an officer can ask you basic questions. Are you the only one in the car? Do you have any guns? Where are you going? The officer can ask you some basic questions. There's no doubt about that. But incriminating questions, you can invoke the Fifth Amendment. You have the right to an attorney. So your rights do play in, and the courts then, I can sum up here this way, the courts then have the role as the guardian of your rights. Suppose something really goes wrong. You have the right, hire an attorney, go to court, and at court show what went wrong. Now remember, don't panic, because that guardian of rights is what the courts play to be sure that everyone goes by the rules. The police officer has to go by the rules. Courts have to go by the rules. So I would close with that thought. If you would give your teacher questions about this, I know I can't come. I normally go to schools, walk in and talk to the students. But since I can't do that, I do want to leave you with this, that if you'll give your teacher questions, I would be happy to answer them. So any questions that you might have about courts and what courts do. Many people don't understand about courts, but you have two basic rights in society, always. One is to vote. The other is to be on the jury. We have juries, coronavirus aside. We have juries all the time, and we count on citizens coming in and sitting on the jury to decide what happens to their fellow citizens. And so I would challenge you to always exercise your right to vote. Always, if you're called to the jury, go and do it as your civic duty, and don't think, oh, it's annoyance and I don't want to do that, because it is your duty as a citizen, but also protecting your own right to be judged by a jury of your peers. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Again, give your teacher questions. I'll be happy to try to answer them. But have a nice day.